good? Yeah, I hope all y'all have water. The hot one. Definitely have some water on me right now. Shit's like 106 over here in California. Ooh, whoops. This sample is really intense. I have another hour right here. Just like a 2-hour little jam. 70, not fair. It was 104 earlier. Okay, so I'm gonna be talking about phaseplant. Okay, so you have the outline and all that, so you can follow along, kind of do your thing. Yeah, and I'm still trying to like dial in my like VCV rack compression and stuff. So for whatever reason, when I'm like running all this shit, I need like another like Furman or whatever. Just get my like Mo2 super quiet. Okay, so today we're gonna like talk a lot about phase modulation and phase distortion. So this is probably like one of the most important styles of synthesis besides FM. I mean, they're kind of both the same thing. Phase modulation is really where it comes from. And there's some like history stuff in here as well, you know. So this is kind of where it all started, and pretty much where, you know, all of it really comes into shape around 1930s, 1950s, 1960s, 70s with John Chowning, and then, you know, any type of modulation record on vinyl is kind of the same thing too. So the carrier is always the medium, and the modulator is whatever signal you want to encode on top of it. So that's really what FM synthesis is in general. It's a modulator, puts its frequency, you know, or just whatever function, data, anything like that, you know, like Wi-Fi, satellite. That's phase modulation as opposed to FM, which is FM radio, you have AM radio. With anything more than that, which is like gigahertz range, you know, it's going to be phase modulation. It's still kind of the same thing, but they handle different, you know, I guess loads. You know, so with a Wi-Fi stream being at gigahertz, that's really, really high. So that, you know, is literally for controlling the amount of data on a stream. So like 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz or 5G, those have different data caps pretty much. So it's not going to change their speed, really. 2.4 actually might be faster in terms of like ping, but you can potentially only send like 80 to 100 megabytes tops, whereas with 5G you can do a lot more than that. So same thing with like FM type signals and AM. So AM, we're talking about radio, that's a mono signal. And its type of modulation is different because it's actually modulating the amplitude as opposed to the frequency or the pitch, anything like that. Ring modulation is really similar to that. And we'll come back to that in like a second. But yeah, I just really want to kind of like set the mood for like FM synthesis and everything like that for everybody that is here right now. Okay, so phaseplant is really, really strong. And when I apply like stuff that I'm doing with FM synthesis just in general already, on top of it, I can get really, really crazy sounds without having to do that much. So, you know, that's one of the reasons why I'm like super stoked on it. All right, so remember how to load up a synth, load up oscillator, output, all that stuff. So we're going to be kind of focusing on this little section right here. So you have two different, well, values here, but you only have one input. So if you want to feed it back into itself, you only have one input for the phase modulation. So it is one set curve, but you can go modulate the shift as well to get a different modulator into the waveform from a different angle. And that's pretty much what every different type of modulation synthesis is about, is that it's really just modulating a different point in the oscillator or a different part of the frequency. So if the frequency has an amp that's putting it out here, then if I go and say patch some other type of like aux modulator and then send that into say level here, then this becomes amplitude modulation. So I'm going to create a mod oscillator here. So it's going to be an oscillator outside of my main oscillator, which is going to be not running to any output. I'm going to keep it basic for now. So a cool thing about phaseplant is it gives you like an updating kind of like readout. And because these are oscillators, they are always on. So if you go and patch it to something, you see the update in real time. So gives a specific sound with amplitude modulation, but you know, it's not as gritty as FM or anything like that. Get this going through my... So what it's doing right now is it's actually rectifying, because that's kind of what sawtooths do, is they multiply and rectify the fundamental, which is interesting, meaning it multiplies that fundamental. When I do it with the actual phase input, then it will go and like create sync oscillation, but if I do it to the amplitude, it creates this rectification, which makes the waveform only positive or negative values. So we'll talk about that more. So when I do this, it's only positive values, and when I invert that, it's only negative values. So, yo, anti-negative, if I download phaseplant, will I be as good as you? Says Betos. I don't know, Betos. Yes. You'll probably be better. So when you do amplitude modulation, it's going to make it pretty much only those types of shapes. You can change the pitch, but that's really a function of it being a 1-to-1 ratio. Anyways, so I'm going to talk more about that stuff. So phase modulation synthesis is like kind of like FM, but it's not plugging into the same exact thing. Where, let me get my browser up over here. Using Brave. Using Brave now because Chrome is the devil. Alright, so phase modulation synthesis, and I include this definition in here as well. It's a modulation pattern for conditioning communication signals for transmission, encodes a message signal, all that shit. So it does all that shit. But really what it's doing, you know, just to sum it all up, is it's modulating one signal with another signal. That's the fundamental of what this is doing. So, you know, any type of data stream is like that. I also have another example that, you know, all this stuff is, you know, pattern based because it's based in heavy math. So that doesn't mean you need to know the math, but it does mean that it's going to have patterns to it, because there is calculations to create very specific things, and the designers of the synth have made it somewhat user-friendly to people who are intellectual, I would say, yeah, that's why I've like said learn the harmonic series and all that shit. Because like if you don't know that, then it really just doesn't even make sense when you're just looking at any FM synth, because you just don't know like the fundamental theory behind it. And it's all the same in every single FM synth. That's why everybody's like, yo, I've been fucking sleeping on operator, dog. Like, dude, I've been fucking wasting my time with fucking serum, dude. And I've been fucking wrecking bitches with fucking operator, dog, now. And it's just like, it's really not that operator's fucking dope. It's that FM is dope. And so literally any situation where you're using FM is dope. And it'll always sound dope. It's like if you loaded up if you got a DX7, ran it through Trash 2, it would sound just as heavy as operator. Chrome is the devil because it like sells your data in the background. Yeah, and like Google is like literally like mining you with Chrome. It's fucking weird. They're mining you for their own purposes, not for like Bitcoining and shit. So they have their own little thing. Anyways, so get Brave or Vivaldi. Highly recommended. Vivaldi is really good because it's almost like Tor. It's like a VPN browser as well. Yes, Chrome uses hella CPU because it is mining you. That's why it uses so much CPU. Because I've looked at the footprint and it's literally 2 gigabytes more than Firefox. Just in general. Okay, so phaseplant has 2 main functions, and phase distortion is like kind of one of them, I guess, in the sense where you can randomize the phase over here with this amount. So phase, offset, and randomness. So offset's going to be right here. You can see that it runs into this. It's not actually offsetting it. So, well, offsetting it in terms of just shifting a window around. This is actually changing the waveform readout. So you can see a little bit of noise there being generated. So by default, it should be at 0. One thing I will also make a comment on about this is that it doesn't really have a really defined re-trigger function for this as well. So when doing FM and stuff, if you decide to start using unison, like all that movement on the waveform is because there's a lot of phase modulation now. So you can undetune it and all that. It doesn't change that much, but it doesn't have like a super phase locked re-trigger. I've been looking for that and I just cannot find it. So, you know, I have it on mono, make that mono, use this as unison. It just still doesn't sound as phase locked as, say, like FM8 or even operator, because it's doing all this extra stuff. So what does that mean? That means that you have 30 possible modules you can drop into phaseplant. So that means you can do 30 individual voices. And that's really what you should be doing. You should use sparing unison if you're trying to be phase locked, and then use as many oscillators as you can. And you can make different groups, make different series changes in there, create your own algorithms. So it's really crazy. Phaseplant's really crazy. So once we learn FM8, you'll be able to step back into phaseplant and do some really, really crazy shit. Because FM8 has all of the major possibilities. Operator does not have what FM8 has, just because of its mod matrix. Like, so you can make much crazier sounds in FM8 than you can with operator. Doesn't mean that FM8's cleaner. It means that you have more possibilities because you have more oscillators and a mod matrix. And you also have multi-breakpoint envelopes. Everybody's just bitching about how hard it is to digest. But if you just know what everything means from the get-go, it actually is really, really approachable. You know, it's just 2 different schools of thought, I guess. Okay, so just want you to look at this kind of graph over here, the way it's like redrawing this waveform. So pretty much this is the carrier to the modulator relationship. So their phase is locking up at different points and creating a movement. So like we talked about pulse width modulation and how that changes the ordering of the harmonics. So if you're to change this window size, which is moving this point over here, you're actually changing the length of this waveform briefly. And if you move it really, really quickly, keep on moving it around, it creates pitch modulation. And that is kind of how sync modulation works in general. So sync modulation goes and shifts that around by locking the start position, syncing the start position with every single cycle of another oscillator, meaning the more sunk it is, the higher pitch it's going to be. So that's kind of where phase modulation kind of like gets most of its strength in terms of like synthesis and stuff, just from being able to have that different control over the waveform. Whereas like FM would literally be hooked into this. So this harmonic shift would need to go, you know, to its full range, and then it would modulate that with a very specific amplitude curve. So you have two different kind of approaches with it. I think phase modulation is much more gritty. Okay, so now phase distortion is a little bit different because now it's literally grabbing the spectrum of any incoming signal and trying to fit it into a different shape and offset the phase of every single harmonic in the signal. So inside of the phase distortion module here, let's bring that out. This works exactly like the, not exactly, but very, very similar to the phase distortion module in Logic. And I really like that plugin. It's really, really great. Like that shit. Honestly, there's a lot of stuff in Logic that is really, really good just for sound design. But yeah, so let's like listen to this. So less drive, it's smoother. I can literally grab all the harmonics and normalize. And we can actually look at that in the spectrum. So pretty much it's just a different way to control the harmonics. And pairing the two together is really cool because phase distortion is almost like sine compression. Because if you're taking all the harmonics and just mashing them together, then yeah, we're definitely going to have an FM8 class. That's going to start next week. And then the last class of this block or section is going to be FM8 only. Okay. So we got some harmonics. All right, that's what it should look like. So it's literally sine compressing this. It's literally smashing this sine wave into another sine wave. And this sine wave is going to be controlled by the tone. So the higher pitch I put this at, you can kind of hear in the top end there. Bias is going to be pretty much the zero crossing, or I guess DC offset of that extra waveform that they're mashing this into. So phase distortion and wave shaping are almost the same, but they're controlling the waveform in two different ways. Whereas wave shaping goes and grabs the curve and then hard, shapes it. So it's like putting a square shape through a single hole, something like that. So it kind of gives you a different shape there. So I was saying normalizing gives you more representation of all the harmonics. So smashing them, making them all flat. so this should kind of sound like a fully modulated 1-to-1 ratio sine wave. And that is what it sounds like. We can actually put that to the test by patching this now like an FM synth. So this has no output, meaning it has no amp. So it's not being sent to the output here. So this has the amp, so it's being sent by default. So I'm going to modulate the phase, and we see it taking shape there. Alright, so that sounds pretty cool. If I go and offset the tuning between the 1-to-1 ratio here, meaning 1, 1. So that's the original fundamental harmonic pitch. I really like this function right here. So that offsets the left and right channel by degrees. Alright, so like on really crazy respaces, this gets really, really crazy. Have this in like a multipass kind of like setup here is pretty great. Pretty dope. So I really like that. And then if you go into offset with phase randomness, it gives you another level of detune. Alright, so it's like another like drum and bass style, just like almost like a tuned down and really filtered down respace. Alright, so phase distortion, really cool. Phase modulation, also really cool. They both kind of do similar things by using the phase to kind of like create new harmonics where there was none. So that's really the kind of like fundamental thing behind this is we're creating new frequencies in a carrier. So it's every single scenario here is going to be kind of like talking about that specifically. So PM locks to frequency, modulator to the carrier, and then PD, phase distortion, locks to waveform, distortion, wave shaping. So frequency, all the harmonics that are generated by the waveform, looking at it from, you know, like a spectrum, or from a waveform, which is how it looks over time. And then just kind of like grabbing one or the other, or it's injecting into that, really. All right, so let's talk about some key terms here, because I'm going to be kind of like talking about this stuff a lot, and you're going to see it in all the outlines. And this part of the outline is going to be pretty much the same for next week. I'm going to add to this because this whole part here is really where we're going to like start kind of like talking about some really heady shit just about FM synthesis and predicting, you know, sidebands in general. Thanks to LSV for all those subs. Appreciate it. And all the follows. DJ Hammerhead. Hell yeah. Alright, so modulator, that is the oscillator that is injected into the pitch, phase, offset, or even amplitude. Remodulation is the same thing, but it's a little bit different. So again, carrier is the oscillator that the modulator is injected into. Alright, so now algorithm, you're going to see this in a couple different synths. If you've ever used a DX7, this is what it calls. the actual routings for the oscillators, all the different algorithms. There's about 22 around there. Same thing in operator. An operator is created pretty much, like the DX7 in a lot of different ways. So that is something you'll see in a lot of different synths. But really, this is just the ordering that every single oscillator, carrier, modulator. So in the DX7, you have kind of a limited number of carriers. In operator, you also have a limited number of carriers. In phaseplant and FM8, you have only the amount that you're kind of limited to there. I guess FM8 has a limit of any audio input, so that makes it unlimited. But then also, it can become an effects unit. So then you can pretty much multiply it as many times as you want. So you can say it's limited because it only has 7 oscillators that are able to be carriers and modulators. But you can also use it as FM8 effects, put it on top of itself, have it create huge crazy chains. I do that with FM8 and Serum, Razor. So FM8 is just kind of like another synth I like to piggyback onto other synths, just to kind of give it another level like FM. Okay, so sidebands, we're going to be talking about this next, and then like making sounds and doing some cool stuff. So this is probably the most confusing thing about FM synthesis theory, because it's not going to be anything that's handed to you. You actually have to know the theory in order to apply it and be, intentional with it. So you can predict that this is how you would create the timbre of this instrument. This is how you would inject this frequency into this part of the waveform. Like, you can do all that, or you can redraw it, with like a wavetable or whatever. But like with physical modeling and creating like real sounding instruments, and then also applying that to literally any other type of music you want to make or anything else like that, like it all starts with understanding what a sideband is, just with FM synthesis. With physical modeling, it also kind of revolves around that, because with that, we're talking about noise as the modulator, and then a comb filter or resonator as the carrier. So, if you're thinking about a real instrument, our modulator for a snare drum would be a stick, and then the carrier, the snare itself. So, all those things are able to be predicted in different ways. And that's going to be in the specific ordering that the carrier modulator have with its relationship between their pitches. So that's the harmonic series, which interval they're set at. So sidebands will always be harmonics created to the side of whatever frequency the modulator is set to or has in its overtone series. So I'm not really going to harp on that overtone series yet, because we want to talk about like sine waves and how to actually use sine waves to like create really specific donk noises. Specifically only donks. All right, but yeah, so moving on from that, we're going to go back into that and just talk more about it. But yeah, remember that sidebands mean bands of frequency harmonics created to the side of the modulator's pitch. Coarse tuning, harmonic tuning, is a tuning scale based on the harmonic series used by FM synthesizers to create an ordered and predictable set of sidebands. So I meant to put a little D there, but yeah, that one slipped away. So this is going to be why you need to know the harmonic series, and why I don't start with FM synthesis like ever when I'm like explaining how synthesis works. Especially like if somebody's trying to understand like some hardware synth they just bought, or even just understanding like what to FM inside of a a Euro rack or VCV rack or any type of modular rack setup. If you don't know FM synthesis, it's kind of hard to know how to patch things together and how to make really, really crazy predictable sounds. So like a lot of that stuff that, if anybody's into Richard Devine, who's like literally one of my heroes and has been for like 10 years, because he just like has designed almost all the most crazy patches in every single synth that I've ever used starting up, and has designed some of the synths that I still use from like early reactor versions of like the early 2000s and stuff, like metaphysical function and a bunch of other stuff. So, you know, a lot of that stuff he's doing is like Car plus Strong, which is physical modeling noise synthesis, along with like FM and impulses and sequencers and all that kind of shit. So it's like, it sounds crazy, but he's starting from one like general reference point and then experimenting with different cross modulation. So it's like cross modulation. That's another version of FM, because now you're crossing two different modulators together. You're combining the actual signals, summing them together, combining the harmonic structure to go and modulate something else. You're not even using that as a pitch modulator or anything. You're actually using it to change parameters. And you're using that in kind of an FM scenario. So you're actually using modulation along with FM matrices together to create really crazy patches. So it's all got to start somewhere. This is like literally the start for me where I got into like crazy modular synthesis, is once I really kind of like digested FM, because like nobody was willing to teach this shit to me, so I had to go and like define it for myself. And this is a lot of stuff, like these are all definitions I wrote. Some of this other stuff, like this right here, anything I've cited right above it is from the article, and this is stuff to kind of like sit on and think about. But these are like the hard terms, how I use them pretty much, and how they're used in most other synths. So you're going to see this info kind of parroted in a lot of other shit as well. So it's kind of universal knowledge with that. Say if you're in Fruity Loops or FL Studio, Citrus. Citrus is amazing synth. It's like FM8 on steroids almost. And bummed it's not for Mac. So that's one of those really, really good synths that you can get a lot of crazy shit out of. Main person I saw using that a lot was Virtual Riot. I'm sure he uses a lot of other shit now. But you can do a lot of the same shit with FM8 and phaseplant. Okay, so we already know what this is talking about because we already talked about the basic waveforms. If you're still confused on what an even and odd harmonic is, then I guess let me know, you know. But even and odd harmonics are in the scale of the harmonic series. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is odd, 2 is even. So that's what we're talking about. Anytime you see that, that's what it's referring to. So this 1 right here is talking about the fundamental. So then 2 is going to be plus 1 octave. So anytime you're going to see anything like this, which you're going to see inside of the synth, not just me listing out formulas, you know, that's actually what it's talking about. All right, so then finally modulation. And then I made this kind of general because we're talking about types of synthesis. But modulation, if you're in a matrix setting with real patch points, then that's anything that you can convert into data or voltage. Data if you're inside of digital setting, voltage if you're inside of a Eurorack. So you got to be able to A to D convert in any modular coding environment. All right, so PM, FM, AM, and RM. That's all the ones we're going to be talking about here. When adding signal to the pitch of another oscillator, this is what it will be called. The injection point determines the type of modulation. So phase, frequency, amplitude, and then ring. So let's talk about ring modulation really quick. What's that mean? They call it ring modulation because it kind of looks like a ring inside of some type of wiring diagram, where you actually repatch and create feedback modulation on pretty much any plugin, anything with an output you can do this with. So the feedback would be amplitude into that feedback circuit, and the more amplitude you give to it, the more modulation you're going to hear. So in ring modulators, they're able to create pretty much an amplitude control for a separate oscillator. And then that separate oscillator has a controllable frequency. And so you can inject that controllable frequency back into its own amplitude pretty much. And then create kind of like a fixed pitch or something like that. Or even key scale it. But it sounds like almost like bit crashing. You know, that's like a very usable sound, I guess, from ring modulation. Or like yoys, like the yoy sound. You can make a lot of really good yoys with ring modulation. Okay, so now let's kind of take a step out of that, because that's a ton of info that you guys are going to have to like digest. If you already know FM synthesis and you're the FM god, for sure. All good. I ain't tripping. No big deal. Dip then. Okay, so now we're going to talk about sidebands and phase modulation, all that stuff. So actually get into phase modulation. So I definitely want you to kind of digest this paragraph. It doesn't need to be, you know, all this crazy math. I'm not really doing this crazy math when I'm like sound design. It's literally using two different sides of the brain. So I'm not gonna cross those streams, because I get less inspired when I'm trying to be very method based and exact. It's just not, doesn't really feed the other. So that's why it's good to internalize the harmonic series again, so you don't have to really think about it and look at it as if it's just some type of mathematical equation. Because I come from more music theory, so when I look at stuff that has patterns, I see that as something I can walk through, because that's just how I know how to play a bass guitar. Half of my knowing music theory was knowing the start note only, and knowing all the different shapes I can put my hand into for those specific different chords. So half the time I wouldn't even be thinking about notes, like literally just not even thinking about notes. And then I would associate shapes with different chords and stuff. I mean, but that's the way I think. I don't want to bog you down with that weird type of way of thinking. It's just how I digest stuff. But because of that, that's how I've dissected pretty much FM synthesis and been able to see the patterns in that, because that definitely has a shape to it. So this is something you're going to want to go back and like reread off stream and then apply, just without me kind of like guiding through it. But yeah, everything summed up into a couple different lines is whenever you have a modulator set to an even number, you're going to have odd harmonics generated. When you have it set to an odd number, you're going to generate even and odd harmonics. So square wave, sawtooth wave. And then the more amplitude you put into the carrier, you're going to get more harmonics. More oscillators equals more harmonics. So there it is. Summed up FM synthesis. You should know it now. You can be as good as Betos. Honestly, like, I'm afraid to even talk about FM synthesis now, ever since like the beginning of the stream. Like, now I know that Betos is using FM, I'm just like, game over, dude. I might as well quit right after this stream and delete my profile. You know, this is how it is sometimes. Some people are just, you can't catch them. All right, so you're going to be able to see this. I listed it out so you can like see the actual numbers, and we're going to kind of look at that more in depth next week as well when we're talking about FM8 and operator, because we can actually see a like a spectrum actively update, and we can see the harmonics being put into the spectrum by the modulation. So whenever I do physical modeling and stuff, I use FM8 mainly because of that spectrum. With phaseplant, you definitely have that too. So there's a lot of different approaches with it. Okay, so let's take a step back here and go back to the beginning. So I'm going to make just a single carrier modulator right now. So the modulator isn't, patched into the output. It's also nothing patched into this modulator, meaning oscillator. So I could create a 2 modulator, 1 carrier FM algorithm by adding another oscillator. So let's actually load up operator here just so we can see that. So a series routing like this would be, B runs into A, C modulates B, D modulates C. Then we have all these different organs that we could put them in, or additively to the output, and in this setting they can feed back into themselves. Or we can run them all in parallel, summing into A. So D modulates A, C modulates A, B modulates A. So we can do all those different routings inside of phaseplant, but now we don't have set algorithms, we just have patch points. And that's what you want, like really. So if I wanted to create 3 parallel modulators, then all I'd have to do is create 3 oscillators and then patch all 3 of them into A. A being this carrier. If I wanted to route them back into themselves, patch them into each other, so this one runs into this one, into that one, and finally into the carrier, I have all those options. So all I have to do is click this, modulate up, and then finally into my carrier. Yeah, I'm going to turn that down first. Alright, so we're going to talk more about sawtooths and square waves next week with FM modulation and stuff, because it gets really crazy really quick in terms of theory, like if you want to be specific about it. So, you can just see how they're multiplying each other. That's a huge pattern with sawtooth waves, is that they multiply each other as opposed to just injecting their frequencies. To Mary's question, why would you do that? Have three modulators? You would want 3 modulators because you can have 3 different injection points for frequency modulation. So they're all going to pretty much create different kind of like additions to the overtone series of this guy. So it's not about having 3 modulators, it's about the ability to have 3 modulators. It's that it's unlimited. It's that you can patch it in any way that you want, through anything that you want, into anything that you want, as many times as you want, up to 30, I guess. But that 30 limit cap is really high. So just think of that and just be like, okay, well then that means FM30. We have FM8, but phaseplant's FM30. And if I can patch it anywhere in itself, just like thinking about that FM matrix literally gives me anxiety. Like if we had to look at that, see like FM8, that's like enough. the big matrix. But FM30, no thank you. I don't want to look at that. So we're going to be focusing on just sine waves for right now. Okay, so just taking a step back here, talking about sidebands and how they're created. So multiples. This is the kind of fundamental kind of, I guess, knowledge that you need to have for this. So that's not calculus. Multiples, I'm pretty sure, are grade school math. Pretty sure. 2 times 2 equals 4. 2 times 2 times 2, 6, 8 tens. I don't know. Yeah, so the multiples are always going to be it's like 2 times 2, 2 times 3, 2 times 4, 2 times 5. So it's not going to be 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. It's going to be, you know, very specific. I guess almost linear instead of exponential, which would be like an exponent. So like when we're talking about creating even and odd harmonics, start with that. So we have a 1 to 3 relationship. So 3 is going to be harmonic number 3. So if I want to make this happen right here, set it to 3. And then I patch into the phase. Okay, so what does this mean? What am I predicting here? I'm predicting that, you know, every multiple of 3, so that means 3 times 2, 3 times 1. So that means 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21. So all those different numbers there are going to have bands to the side of them. So that means you're going to have 2 and 4, means you're going to have 5 and 7. So you're just like going to have a bunch of different couplets, as I call them, because they come in pairs of 2. That's just the way they fall. That's the way they do it. Just because the numbers. So pretty much every time you have an odd number, you're going to have those couplets. So you go to 5. They just go into different octave ranges. So that's how it looks when you do an odd modulator. You create even and odd harmonics. And if even was a goal to only have even harmonics, which is not a goal, because we want an odd harmonic because that's 1. 1 is our odd harmonic that we want. All the other ones are cool, but we just want 1 because that's the actual bass note or the fundamental. So now when we get into predicting odd harmonics, which are going to sound like a square wave, and donk noises, wonk noises, any donk, wonk, wub, chub, schwonk, chonk, dwonk. I got dwonks. Dwonks are pretty good. They're like a donk that's super wonky. Yeah, they have kabonks, yeah. All right, so the relationship there is even numbers. So every time you go and multiply in an even number, you're going to generate odd harmonics. So, you know, I can just, you know, kind of think of that when I'm starting to make different sounds like that. So think of it as kind of a starting point. We're only using sine waves here. But if I was to use like a wavetable that had a really defined fundamental, you know, I can get something really, really interesting just by applying it in really specific ways. Also, like say if you were creating a sound, and you're like, oh, this sounds dope and wonky, you know, whatever this sounds like. Oh, it's gonna freeze. It's just like, hey, I don't want to work. All right, so now if I wanted to add more to this or even I'm going to add a wavetable oscillator. This patch is like that. I'm going to actually pitch this down to 2. And then I'm going to add to its spectrum by injecting kind of a weirder wavetable. A lot of harmonics, a lot of overtones. Do a growl. Neuron. Neuron for Nero. Nero kid never leaves his Nero. Got him. Alright. So I'm going to inject this parallel. So that means not through this oscillator, parallel directly into my carrier. All right, so like directly to what you were saying, Miri, you know, that is why you would want to do more than one oscillator. That's one direct scenario where, say if you wanted like a really filled in low mid range. So you started with like something that was already dark. I can also run this through a filter. I can change its frequency spectrum. So like right here, I can just go and add a filter to its chain and then patch that into FM. So now I'm controlling the range of harmonics, and we can see that update in real time. All right, so that's super cool. Definitely really unique to phaseplant. Just being able to create a ton of different chains like this. So it's really not about where the signal's flowing in this group. Really what I'm worried about is where it is in the chain. So if I want to go and add a filter to my sine wave oscillator, make it a sawtooth, and I just want to have it directly after it. If I want to send these to their own output, all I have to do is patch an output right here. And now I have my mod oscillators going to their own output as well. So I can get their signal too. Mix it back in with the sound. So that's not really, you know, it looks kind of crazy what I just set up here, but that's not really anything, you know. This is literally just one carrier and then me just adding different possibilities to the mod oscillators. That's really what FM synthesis is all about. You know, just having a really, really complex modulator. So why does Serum sound so good even though it has only 2 oscillators? And well, I guess that's the reason why. Because it has 2 really complex oscillators that are based in sine waves too. Like, FM synthesis sounds better when the actual waveforms are created by partial banks because of the sine wave being the building block. Pretty much all of the different, like, you know, frequency readouts, spectrum analyzers, anything that is kind of like utilizing FM synthesis and different non-musical but audio related things. All right, so we're gonna kind of step back into this next week and go back into FM synthesis. So specifically with FM, not with phase modulation synthesis. But yeah, so that's where I'm gonna kind of leave off with that crazy theory shift for today, just because I don't want to go too much farther into it. And so I want to start making some patches and then designing some wavetable stuff. So again, summed up, even number creates odd harmonics, odd number creates odd and even harmonics, and the little couplets. So they come in little pairs of 2. I hope I did. I just sold face. Kilohertz owes me. You owe me, Kilohertz. Alright, so definitely awesome. Gotta just kind of like sit on that stuff. It's like this is stuff I actually digested from some paper that John Chowning wrote, uh, and in a Stanford thing, and I actually have the link, but it's really hard to read. At some point, I just started sitting down and like outlining it, and something just like clicked, and I saw all these like patterns with the formulas, and I was just like, oh shit, and then I started applying them. I was like, oh shit, it's like that's the thing. So I've kind of digested that, and I had to actually learn a method for it because I started teaching when I was so young, just like literally 20 years old going on 21, and I was just like freaking out because I had to teach FM synthesis, and I wasn't gonna bullshit like my last teacher. Um, so it's just like something I can't do, especially being 20 years old and having to sell a $1,400 class, 1,400 per student to a bunch of people that are 10 years older than me. Yeah, fuck that. Even worse than streaming. All right, so only thing I want you to go and like test out, because I'm not going to talk about this right now, is undertone modulation. And I think there's a couple videos floating out around about that. I saw Ties from Noisia share some shit about that at some point. I think it might have been Martin. But yeah, so definitely try this out. So every single relationship I listed out here is a sideband formula. Undertone sideband formulas require the carrier to be a higher frequency than the modulator. So you create undertones, tones under the fundamental. So you can create a ton of really crazy shit like this because you don't need to have a fundamental in your carrier. You can just put one additively there with the sub oscillator. So that's another way to think about it. Layering. How are you going to just carve out the different pieces of your sound from your synth inside of your synth and then stack it all together and sum it? Especially with knowing how to set up a sub oscillator, really opens up the playing field for you just to do literally any sound. And that's why rhythm has had so much life. Like, people are so mad at it now, but I've been listening to rhythm since 2010 in a very similar form that it is right now. It just was quieter. It was a lot quieter. Big tune. Dude, that stream the other night, Renraku, was toxic as fuck. Just kidding. It was great. Just, damn, so much gambling. I actually have that bot for my stream, but we ain't turning that on. We ain't turning that on. Okay, so now let's go make some sounds, because you're going to be thinking about FM synthesis, hopefully, while you're sleeping. Now, just be like, but the numbers, what do they all mean? Hopefully. That's the hope. You're just thinking, looking at yourself in the mirror in your bathroom. But the numbers. Okay, so let's go jump into that shit. So we're gonna create an oscillator, creates a group, amp. Nice. Now I'm gonna go create the same thing I just made. So now I want to go and create an FM envelope. So I'm gonna make this a triangle. That's gonna be a sign. Okay, so I want an envelope. How do I get this guy to be controlled by an envelope? Create an envelope first. Now, when you go and modulate patch, and we talked about how to patch this, same way you patch anything else, we have a little star right below the patch point. And this shows up whenever you have an existing modulator on that parameter. So FM modulator is existing, so I click that. And whatever modulator I want to add this envelope to pretty much sidechain and move up and down. Now moving this value up and down. I just click that. So now we see nothing happen on this waveform anymore because it's going to update in real time. That's really dope. All right, so again, that was me creating an envelope. So this is my mod oscillator. Patch into my FM, set an amount, maybe even modulate this guy. Now I go click on my envelope, click the star, click plus, good to go. I can trim this back in order to trim my envelope modulation. Alright, so we're making donks now. Donktown. Lords of Donktown. The movie. Lords of Donktown 2. Dude, that shit was great. Way better than number 1. Alright, so I'm going to add some more modulation in here. And we're going to start making like a patch. Do I want to disperse? No. I'm going to filter though. Okay. So let's set up a couple different chains here. So I want to set up a 2 oscillator. Well, actually, I want to set up a 2 filter patch. So that means run 2 sets of oscillators into 2 filters, run them parallel, and then sum them into my master here. Because this is going to kind of like give us a little bit more control over pretty much how to route all this stuff. So if these are my, like, call this oscillator A, we'll call this mod A, mod A, man. Then I'll go and create another group here. That'll be oscillator B. All right, so you get the picture. So this one is going to be, well, if it was a Reese patch I was designing, I would have 2 analog oscillators, probably sawtooths, and I'd be running them parallel, maybe 3. Like a 3 oscillator synth is really good for Reese bases. Yeah, just for now, let's run the wavetable. And then got to patch that into an output. Can't forget that step. All right, so now I'm going to patch this into lane 2. So I can have my mod A patch into both. And then we'll have this modulator patch into both as well. Okay, so it's working. The patch is working. I'm going to make it mono by pulling the voices down all the way. And I believe I talked about this function over here, but you can turn off lanes, turn on lanes, mute, solo, and then create a polyphony with the effects over here. So say if I wanted to make this one a little bit more harmonic. Cool. I'm going to go and get another filter here and make it a bandpass. Also want to make sure these are patched correctly. So we patch both of them into lane 3. Cool. All right, so I can link all these, you know, points to cut off, all that stuff to one envelope. I think I'm going to do multiple envelopes just for this one. Alright, so I'm going to have my bandpass move around. Alright, so I'm going to add another modulator. So that's an option drag to duplicate, and it does not duplicate destinations. So I'm going to do parallel modulation here, so it's modulating in parallel, nothing modulating my oscillator here. And push this up a couple harmonics. Sick. Cool. Alright, so now I'm going to add another thing to get this higher layer to kind of move around. And remember, these are both summing to 3 here, so I can add a compressor, another filter, whatever I want. That's really the point of these lanes, is to be able to patch multiple different kind of like orderings of oscillators together. You can even use all 3 parallel and just patch each to the master. I tend to like the 2-chain kind of like parallel, but you can definitely do 3. And I've done 3 on a couple different patches, just a lot. So I'm going to have this move a little bit quicker here. And I'm going to modulate this LFO just very slowly. Alright, cool. So it's doing a little flirble, Yeah, exactly. 3 is good if you want the separate clean sub. And say if you were also putting saturation on your whole entire patch, you can say like just patch straight to your master, because that's actually like the next like piece to add here. And we'll go and do that by, actually instead of that we'll do another group. So we gotta let's create a group here. This will be our sub oscillator, so we want to create analog, make a sine, or I can make it any other waveform, filter it down inside of this as well. And then patch to an output, and then we can patch either into lane 3 or to the master. So now I got a lot of weird modulation going on this second oscillator. You can also like add some more texture to it, pitch it up higher. Then I can control its actual envelope here, make it just an impulse. And then maybe add space on this higher layer only, so it's not actually taking any low frequencies and giving them space. It's another thing I like. Oh, the verb right here. It was just a very big donk. And then patch everything through here, run it through like a saturator or something. The saturator is a lot, so what I do when I load it up is color all the way down at 0, or 50 turns off the filter, and then fuzz all the way down at 0 turns off the fuzz, and then I'll kind of like pull in the drum. But I like it because it's like sausage fattener inside of the synth. super bass housey. All right, so that's how to set up these really basic chains. Literally, just one little mod pair right here, 2 oscillators, one that's going into lane 2 just as a higher layer. And remember, I like to put it into its own lane to add space so I don't put any bass stuff in there. You can put sub into verbs. I like doing that, but I do it momentarily. I don't do it the whole time. If I'm doing something that is like that and it makes it sound like it is, it's really not, because I never have stereo subs. It's just something I never have. But there's a lot of times where I make it sound like it does, so then I spread out 100 hertz or 200 hertz, but it's really not in the sub range. I just spread out the low mids. Yeah, so definitely this sound can start to like kind of move around, do a bunch of weird stuff with its actual macro control, which actually is a good kind of segue into like the last section I added into here about modulation, which is, we already talked about all that stuff. I just wanted to make sure you saw it again, just for all of the MIDI modulation. But our multipliers, these are kind of cool because we can actually have, you know, macros change things like this, or we can have LFOs kind of combine 2 different inputs together, and then you can pretty much have them cross modulate. So utilities in here, the multiplier. So want to go and modulate one of these inputs. So the input is the actual input, I guess. So in order to get signal through the multiplier, you have to patch a modulator onto the separate knob. All right, so now say if I want to combine these 2, so now the multipliers have been combined, and then I can step that up with the static multiplier. I'm going to apply it to one of these things here, like the knob. Now I can go and scale, so auxiliary modulation, mod, macro that. I can patch that into all these guys. So now all that movement really is being scaled. Okay. All right, so now just gonna patch the static into this as well. Filter flutter. All right, so say I want to go and make it flutter longer. I can go patch this macro into decay on this guy. And then oscillator B is also being modulated on its amplitude envelope right here, so I can also patch it into that guy too. Maybe patch it into another random parameter like the frequency shift. Alright, so I multiplied it by 1,000 and it became like just a higher frequency now. It's just some noise in the sound because it's moving this cutoff filter so quickly. Maybe I want to go and change this into a sawtooth now because it's multiplying. Okay, so now I'm doing a bunch of weird modulation with this in order to get kind of like a really squirgly sound in here. Okay, so what I'm actually doing here is I'm creating filter FM. So it's just multiplying the signal of this LFO, which is at 50 hertz, by 10 to 1000. And then I'm patching that into the filter. So if you're wondering, hey, how do I get this oscillator's output into a filter? Well, in here, we can patch, I believe, from output here directly to cutoff. So you're gonna have to do something like that. Or you can go and send LFOs or low frequency oscillators through the actual multipliers and create FM signals. Alright, so got something really, really complex over something really, really basic. Mix that in. I'd probably use this a little bit quicker. Actually, I'd probably use it like that. I don't know, like a halftime track or something. Okay, so I erase a lot of patches. Something I do. Oh, hell yeah. Definitely need that 0 tep love in the chat. Okay, so talked about some of the multipliers. So again, you have to go and patch something into this if you want to go and get something to modulate it. So you can patch into different macros, have them kind of like create like a combination of their modulation. And then that gets output through its patch point here. So that's cool. And also don't forget about self-modulation. So right here, you can patch into itself, into any point. Gets really, really messy really quick. So if you want to get some of that, but then you wanted to just like pull it back. So you can patch pretty much anything in the actual environment here together. So I can patch this here as well. It just sounds really good by default. That's one thing I just really like about this synth. As opposed to the way Serum kind of like sounds very digital. This does have a digital sound too. I'm not going to say it doesn't. But definitely sounds and works really interestingly. All right, so now let's talk about this. So the actual wavetable editor here is really simple, actually. And it's really easy to use. I really like it. So, let's, I just typed in F like a million times. It's because I was playing notes. So let's start off by importing some samples. How to import sample. Can you automate the automation? 0%. Yeah, you can. You should be able to actually. Let's double check that question. So I'm going to patch this into my modulator here. And while I do it. All right, so that is a little bit hard to do. But that's a really good question because we're about to leave like the complex modulation here. And I literally did just make a point about this, about auxiliary modulation. So we'll just step away from that for just a second. But say if I wanted to go and scale this and automate that literal what you were saying. In this sense, it's called modulation. So I believe in the new Serum update, this is something you can do now, is you can modulate points like that. But you should only be able to modulate parameters from phaseplant. So we got our macro that pops up here. And it's pretty much what we want to do. Same exact way as the way I created a envelope for my FM. So if this is patched into here on my wavetable position, then I go and patch my macro into this modulator and then just turn it on. So now this macro will scale the amount of movement. All right, so auxiliary modulation, just set it up in here. Macro is now scaling the amount of envelope or the amount of modulation. So that means my macro can be hooked into any of these guys, and we have 8 macros to work with. So that is one thing I use macros for a lot. It's to turn on and off effects. Yeah, so Mr. E beats exactly what you're saying to all this. And I appreciate you saying that in chat. So that's exactly what the problem is, and that problem is not unique to phaseplant. It's unique. It's really just a thing with modular environments. You have to create ways to get out of it, because this is kind of like a DAW within a DAW. It's kind of like Reactor, but with only one function, which is make these synths in these environments, effects in this environment, modulators in this environment. But this is modular. It's not like off by default, which is the way Serum works, where it's like, oh, here's the reverb. It's off, though, and you only have one, because it's always there. You don't create it in order to load it up. So when you create something to load it up, you have to be able to target it. Hence why this doesn't work. Whenever you configure something, it should pop it up, and that means that it's automatable. So the fact that it's not popping up means that this sustain knob is not able to be automated. So you're gonna have to macro a lot of shit together. That's one of the biggest limitations of phaseplant currently. But yes, they are definitely working on that. and I think it's a really, really common thing. The worst synth that ever screwed that up was Razor. But I love Razor still. So that's not really that big of a limitation. Just because of how much modulation you can just set in here. Okay, so anyways, let's go into the wavetable. So what I was about to say was that importing samples into phaseplant is actually like 50 times easier than Serum. I want to say like 1,000, but at least to 50 to 100. So I just really like it. It gives you like a really interesting kind of like way to digest the sample. So I just dropped this super long resample into here. I get to trim my start position, and then it creates a wavetable based off of where the start and end position is. So that's super cool. So I don't want it to start there. Okay, so when you import, you just highlight this little section here, which is your start and end position. You don't want to go and modulate anything in here because this is going to kind of shift around your frames. So it's shifting around where your wavetable is going to base its frames. So we have 256 frames, meaning 256 different points I can shift. So yeah, I really like I like this discussion that's happening right now, because like this is literally like where I come from with it, because I started in Reason and stuff like that. So I've had to do workarounds with combinators for years, because like just my computer couldn't handle native instruments for a long time. Okay, so I imported a long sample in here, just literally dragged and dropped. Use these two little start and end positions here, which is tight. Cool. Done. All right, so now I have my wavetable. I didn't do any morphing, but that's not super important right now. So if I want to go and get back into the morphing section, which is the crossfade section here, we have our morph tool, which allows us to shift into spectral morphing or linear, which is crossfade. Now I actually create a copy of just this one wavetable. So let's actually, let's do this again here, and I'll just go and straight up do it. All right, so phase alignment here is really going to be how you go and morph all this. So naive, correlate, lock, fundamental. Naive is really interesting, and why it's interesting is because it like locks the phase modulation, or not phase, the pitch modulation inside of the wavetable. So I like to import subsamples into my wavetables a lot, and the naive function has done it better than I've been able to get with Serum in a lot of different ways. And I'll show you that with some of this 808 warfare stuff. But yeah, so pretty much like, it's just kind of like hard locking the sound, whereas these are looking at it spectrally and then calculating it spectrally up to 1,000 partials here. And locking all of the harmonics, locking only the fundamental, or correlating between the two, the original or the perfectly phase locked spectral version. So it has a ton of functions in here that literally allow you to detect the root by default. You don't have to do anything more than that. You don't have to go and, you know, record the perfect sample at the perfect length, at the perfect tempo, like you have to do with Serum. Kind of does it for you a little bit. It doesn't sound the same, but it sounds really, really good for what it is. So like when you go and do the whole process to create a wavetable for Serum, it will sound exactly like the sample, near next to perfect. But there's definitely a lot of compromises you have to make during the process, and it's not as intuitive. So it's just very heavy-handed. So we're gonna go with naive to start out with. You can see that my phase is a little bit off here. All right, so that's pretty chill. Let's actually try locking the fundamental here. So when you lock the fundamental, it should lock up your phase kind of for you. So this is one of the dopest things about this, is that you can input the sample right here, yes. But then you can like go and audition different sections. Like, Jesus, like that's really dope. So obviously there's kind of a limit here, so it does stop reading after this point. But you have a ton of different information to kind of like choose from, which is about like, this is about, well, 8 bars, yeah. So say about 20-30 seconds. So there's like a ton of information I can work with, and just drop it in here. Okay, so I'm gonna try to mix in between the two, see how that sounds. Liking the fundamental. Okay, so we're gonna lock it there, and then all right, sweet. All right, so I just went and printed from that first again, just so I get kind of like a snapshot of this waveform here. So now I kind of want to go and work in the editor, just to kind of like move on from that, because we're going to make a couple different sounds here really quick. All right, so we have a ton of effects. So we have literally every single effect here will give us things that are being processed in the background. So sine FM allows us to control this meter here and literally bake into the file this modulator. So this is something that does not exist in Serum. And if it does, it's not at this quality. This is something that, say, if you were going to use that LFO modulation, you can go and create these shapes. But honestly, I'm not going to sit there and draw LFO curves for an hour just to print into a wavetable. Just not something I want to do. Okay, so once you're done with that, go hit done, bakes it into it. So you can do that a bunch of times. Self FM, how much feedback modulation you want to add, puts it into the whole thing again. Hit done, process it again. Okay, so now in our other tools here, we have a waveform generator pretty much, where I can just kind of like inject a sine wave, repeat it, offset the phase, can lock it to different grids as well, change the window size. So look at this readout over here when I do this. It's combining these two waveforms now. Try to get the pitch back on here. All right, so that's an interesting effect there. Do a lot of weird stuff with it. A couple other extra things in here. So now we have the pencil tool. So we should be able to kind of like lock into certain shapes, kind of trim out, create lines, points, and draw into new shapes here. So there's a lot of like really intuitive tools inside of this waveform draw. So honestly, there's really just almost infinite possibilities you can do with this thing. Create new loops on this specific different shape that you're drawing here. Go and focus on another frame. You can go and create a new loop for that. So that's another really cool thing in here, is that you can go and drag these pretty much highlighters and then go add an effect for that one section. So I can apply an effect here, offset its bias, distort it, done, and then go add different effects, maybe add comb filtering to it. All right, so now let's morph. All right. Sometimes it doesn't apply it to the thing I was like selecting. That's fine though. So there's just so many things you can do in this. It's kind of crazy. So direct harmonic editing, you can go and use your tools like this. You have a filter, pretty much that you can select different stretches or frames, kind of see how the actual spectrum is going to look. That's pretty cool. And then redraw it if you want. Yeah, so just to kind of like touch on, anybody that's from out of the country, pretty soon I'm gonna try to do like just 2 classes where I have one for out of the country and then for like American time zones, so we can kind of like, so you guys can be active and not be working on it so late, because it's definitely kind of a hassle to do that and learn at different times like that. So definitely want to kind of work around your guys' schedule. All right, so there's like a ton of stuff in here that you can go and apply to all these different waveforms. The effects are probably the coolest thing. Like the frame blend, you can go and blend the different frames together. So distance is how many. So you see my waveform here, and then when I blend it more, it actually creates this kind of smoothed out version. This is kind of the morphing function for it. That's probably the smoothest. And I can go and take out bands if I want. Yeah, that'll be tight. You know, because definitely supporting this, you know, on my unemployment and the fact that I can't network right now, and it's really hard for me to do my professional work right now. So that's why I'm doing this. So maybe at some point I will make it up there for something, but currently it's not all put together, and it's just a ton of work to do. So it's just all in baby steps for me right now, so I don't have a breakdown. Not really have a breakdown, just really just have like a consistent flow with it and not have to take like chunks of time out of, you know, like off of it, you know. Okay, so that's the wavetable editor pretty much. Definitely go and just drag in stuff. Try it out. Just try it out. Let's import something else into it. And I was talking about subsamples. Let's go into the 808 Warfare. I love all these. All right, that's a good one. Okay, so should be able to drop it in here. It doesn't ever work for me though. I don't know why. For whatever reason, doesn't want to. But yeah, we're gonna drop it in here, and then we're gonna go naive. So now I'm gonna go and patch this into my frame, so I can play it back kind of like a sample. We have a sampler in here, so we don't have to do it this way. But it does have kind of an interesting timbre to it. So I'm just going to patch this envelope, use the attack as a playback. All right, so we have a bunch of like non-blending happening right now. So adding more crossfade, we'll add a little bit more blend. Could try to go and find that pitch a little bit more. And our pitch here will really determine our start point. So we can use the pitch to kind of offset that zero crossing as well. So pretty much all this stuff should kind of be done for you. If you see it offset by the start point, which is your 0, then just go and offset this, this root pitch. These values plus 25, plus 40, that means cents. All right, so now back into effects. I can go and do frame blend. Kind of mix it a little bit, smooth out those weird offsets. You can also try different versions of this, but like I would probably use this as like a lead or something. So I really like that shit, especially if you just run it through like a verb or some type of delay or something. So this is stuff I use wavetables for kind of experimentally, where I just drop in random stuff, try to create pitches where there weren't any. And samplers, in this sense, would be really good for layering actual textures and stuff. So I'm gonna add a verb. And before this in the chain, remember hold command to insert stuff, snap in plugins, insert. And then we're gonna get delay. This boy here, pan it, ping pong it. Affiliate link? Not sure what that is. Actually I don't. I'm not actually affiliated with Kilohertz. I'm part of a label that is. Matt Zoe is affiliated, and so is Matt Zoo. So I guess I'm affiliated through that. So you could probably go and look into Matt Zoe's shit and pull out one of his discounts that he has until Kilohertz decides that my teaching is okay. That's a whole long process, though. I would like to have discount codes for all the shit that I show you guys. Because if anything, that's all you have to pay for in this teaching environment is just the plugins. And it's one of the reasons why I like kind of being a little bit more lenient on not having people pay me for it, because they can pay the plugin companies. All right, so I'm going to add a little sampler in here. But I'm also going to add this. Get a sample. Okay, so the sampler we already talked about, but really simple again, root node right here, offset is going to be for the start position. And then we have loop directions, infinite, sustain, ping pong, reverse. Infinite should just kind of roll in this little section here until the release is done. But we can also run harmonics into it. This is what's super cool, because we just talked about this on Sampler from Ableton. Now you can do this in any sampler, or in any environment, really. That's pretty cool. It's a very deep sound. Like I would put that on like some kind of 140 deep shit. And that's me running two different 808 samples into each other in two different ways. Converted one into a wavetable, used one as a sampler, used the one that I converted into a wavetable as a modulator for my sampler. Sick, bro. That's the kind of stuff that, like, it sounds complicated, but it's just literally the ability to do it. That's what I like. I'm actually going to save that one. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about today. Talked about a ton of stuff. I handed you guys a bunch of different Just like basses and you know, just different. That one's really, really gnarly. They're all loud. So yeah, enjoy those. I'll probably give out a bigger pack at some point. But yeah, so we got a couple more minutes here. What I want to do for the last couple minutes is talk about a couple non-gnarly FM sounds, because we do a lot of gnarly shit in here, but for the most part, when I'm doing stuff professionally, it's like non-gnarly. So here's a couple like different like things I would do, like say for like a pad. This one will be a pad, and then this one, next one after that will be like a kind of like a key bell tone. Okay, so we'll do one FM setup over here. So this is going to be a 2 oscillator FM setup. And I'm actually going to filter these two down. I'm going to detune them slightly. And then I'm going to patch the second one that's detuned into the phase modulation. Okay, cool. So I got kind of like a analog oscillator going on right now. I'm going to use a sampler, and then that's also going to be in its own group. So if you accidentally patch something into another group, you just create a group snap in between it, and then have to create an output for it. So these are going to be a pad, so I want long evolving envelopes. And this is kind of where we're going to be going to 110. It's just pretty much all about these sounds, but we're going to be talking about specific FM sounds over next couple weeks that are non-respaces too. There are more sounds than growl basses. Alright, so by default with like long evolving sounds, you want long evolving effects as well. So got reverb, patch both of these to the master here. So now I have two effects chains. I'm going to patch one into 2 and one into 3. So now I am routing this parallel. But I want both of my oscillator groups to go there, to those two specifically. Alright, so I'm going to comb through this with my resonator. Note to resonator, 100%, and then longer attack. You go and put that on here as well, scale it. So I want to get some, let's get Foley. Nature, wind. Perfect. Cool. All right, so now both of these are gain resonated, and now they're both running through like separate effects chains. Here I'm gonna sum them into 3, and then I'm gonna filter them one more time, just so they don't get too out of control. I use a lot of low passes on pads, and then I'm going to put them in another space, which is just another reverb. And this would just be like an out-of-the-box patch for like a pad. Yeah, okay, so what's happening here is I'm patching both oscillator groups into lane 1 and 2. And then I'm summing those together in 3. And then with my cross modulation here, what I'm doing is really simple, is I'm self-modulating the analog here, shifting it pretty much with my long evolving envelope very slightly by 1%. All right, so now I can have this cutoff open up a little bit. To Mr. E Beats, yes, I do. That is my main job. I'm a subcontractor, though. I work for myself and for different companies. Save. I'll call this the tension sweetener. Sweetener. I like that. I like the double E at the end. Okay, so why did I call this tension? Because this is what I do for tension music, and it's just like create dissonance on one note, because the one note doesn't directly take your attention, but the detune in between those two notes creates an unease. And that's super cool for like drum and bass intros and anything that's going to be somewhat like dark. Okay, so all that being controlled from one envelope. That's kind of like the main fundamental you must understand with pads if you want to create really interesting and evolving pads, is how to lock everything in this long timeline, having a kind of a bigger scope of how the sound develops over time. When I'm thinking about a respace or like some weird patch I'm doing for a track, it's just like very momentary. It has to be all there from the get-go. But with the pad, it's how does it reveal itself? Okay, so that's that. And final thing, let's make some nice little bell tones. So bell tones, what's the best way to do it? We're going to talk about this again in 110 as well as in the FM stuff next week. And then when we get into 201 and 210, it's going to be taking these techniques using the more complicated synths. If this wasn't already complicated, there's stuff that's way more complicated. and then applying it with intention, because like there's Omnisphere, the patch player, or there's Omnisphere, the synthesizer. Like there's it's literally two versions of Omnisphere. We're gonna be talking about Absinthe, which Mary just said there. So Absinthe 5 is really awesome. Another semi-modular synth just like this. Has more types of synthesis than phaseplant does, but really it's like it specializes in its grain clouds and all of these other crazy things it could do with its envelope, as in like even write LFOs into envelopes and get things to cross modulate in really, really interesting ways. Another synth that was like kind of beta tested and helped out by Richard Devine. That's definitely another Richard Devine touch there. Okay, so I'm going to create a couple mod oscillators here. We're going to create a couple carrier oscillators. That's a 2C, 2M. Actually, we're going to make it a 3M. So one for each part of the impulse. So this is your intro to physical modeling right now. So got a lot of sounds summing together right now in a non-musical way. For the moment, I'm going to turn off this oscillator here. So I have 3 different parts of like a bell I want to create. First is the space, reverb. It's going to be the easiest way to do it. And then is the envelope. So no sustain, only attack and decay. And I'm done. All right, so now I want to go and modulate. So we're going to go and inject this into the phase modulation. And then I'm going to create an envelope. This literally should be like a 2-minute process, really. So then I create FM modulation with, or an FM envelope with that little star as we just covered. Okay, so this one needs to be a high ping. Ping meaning it's going to be the strike. It's going to be the sound of the tine. Or if we're making bells, it's going to be the metal dangling thing inside the bell, whatever that's called. I'm sure it has a proper name. Some bell experts like, how dare you call the ganglia something else? I'm like, whoa, dude, it's called that there too. Okay, so that needs to be a very, very quick envelope. Add that in. Cool. All right, so now I create the body. And now that's going to be parallel. All these are parallel. I'm going to make one series right here. We'll see why. So this one's going to be the body now. Injecting parallel. Okay. Let us scroll. Thank you. Okay, so this one is going to have a different envelope. Envelope going to be longer. Hook it up to that second one. And this one is going to be, again, longer. Also have an exponential curve. Now we can extend this a little bit. Sick. So we got our bell tone. This is like an FM bell tone right now. So higher pitches create different bodies. This is a 1-to-1 ratio right now, so it should sound woody. Wood-like texture, FM fret bass. Anytime you go and start to increase the octaves, now depending on which harmonic you choose, meaning the type of sidebands you create, you will get 2 different types of physical spaces. You'll get a tube-like woodwind or a string-like kind of like brass instrument. So a donk bass is a bell played low. Alright, so I always run like a filter on my bells. Okay, so I want to give this kind of like now key that I'm designing, because if it's going to be a bell, it needs to be really high pitched. So I'm going to want to push this up above about 8 or 9. Just trying to play chords on my keyboard right now. Alright, so I want to make this a little bit more string-like and have like a bell-like overtone, so a high ping to it, but also have like a string-like texture to it. So now I'm going to add a series modulator into this guy, and it's going to be a sawtooth. I'm going to leave it a sawtooth intentionally. Alright, so now I'm going to leave this here. So this has a really high frequency like sine wave tone. I can hear the sine wave in it. I'm going to break that sine wave up a little bit. So I'm going to add in a noise oscillator. I'm just going to modulate very slightly. So I'm going to add noise into the sine wave for the sake of adding realness. And again, I can add in more stuff into this, not a distortion. Although I could. For the moment, no. I'm going to take out a lot of the low frequencies though. And I'm going to take out this patch, and then I'm going to patch into here with a high pass noise. Alright, so I'm going to use this noise bell tone that I just made. And I'm going to run it through a resonator. So I'm going to create a physical modeling type series route here. Physical modeling requires you to create an impulse that runs into a physical surface resonator. So now again, patch this into here, 100%. Sounds beefy. Nice and beefy, mate. Maybe want to do a bandpass on this. I'm going to reorder this too. I'm going to put the filter pre-resonator. patch to lane 2. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm doing right now is like A is theory because I'm actually doing car plus strong right now. But I'm also thinking like, how do I want to split this out? How do I want to add to it? What other textures could I put in? This is cool, like bell tone, or is this a cool string sound? So like this right here is making it a little bit too wonky. All right, so that's cool. I'm gonna push this up a lot. All right, option drag should keep the tuning. I'm gonna push this up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's filter again. Yep. All right, so there's so many different sounds you can make with this. This is literally using noise as an impulse. And then, you know, if you think like, all right, well, what then can I modulate with noise? What can I use as an impulse? What can I use as just literally anything for this? Again, like FM, what can I use as a modulator? What can I use as a wavetable? What can I use as like all the pieces for the source material? So you got to know how to utilize the theory in tandem with the tool. It makes you a stronger producer. It shouldn't detract from your music at all. What detracts for me personally, because we're all done for the day, but just for a final word, I guess, what detracts for me personally when I'm learning new stuff is that, you know, I'm not taking the time to digest it. And I find this whenever I do anything new, which is like a new video game, a new whatever. It's like with Rocket League. I love Rocket League. Play that shit all the time. Pretty good at it. But at first, I was terrible because I didn't actually go and watch anybody who was super good play. Then once I did, I was like, oh shit. So I don't know what I'm doing. Right. But I was able to make goals. I was able to win games. So, you know, it's like, I catch myself whenever I do that in anything in life, just so I can constantly never plateau in anything and get complacent. Because complacency is like toxic. It spreads to the rest of your life once you kind of lose interest with something. So in order to keep myself interested with everything, I always am digging for new stuff about it, new knowledge, new things, and I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid that I have to learn something new, you know? That's what I feel like is the biggest roadblock as an older producer if you've been in the game. Because for me, I guess I would be considered an older producer because I've been in the EDM scene for, you know, a minute now. 8 years is a long time. Like active and shit. And then prior to that, in a touring metal band, you know, for like 6 or 7 years before that. So like, that's like a ton of shit, you know? So now I'm at a point where I'm just like having to keep myself interested, and it's not hard. Really, it just isn't, because I'm always learning new shit. Always learning new shit from new plugins, new synthesis, new knowledge, meeting new people, and just living life more. Not like being like, oh, well, you know, my favorite fucking dude, like, doesn't even know how operator works, so why did I take all that time to go to school. It's like, well, because you're going to be stronger than that dude one day. Like, for real. All right, so that's it for today. Come through Thursday, we're going to be going to Contact and building some multi-samplers in Contact and talking, introducing some of the AT more filtering and talking about how to build samplers and stuff. And then I'm going to have a couple of samplers I built kind of up so you guys can like look at that stuff. All right, so that's it for today. I'll play y'all some random shit.